Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I'm delighted to have been asked to chair this panel on Germany as a global health and development hub, and I have with me a great group who have been involved with Germany in a variety of ways. So first I would like to introduce them. First of all, Dr. Chidi Moeti, who is the WHO Regional Director for Africa, Mr. Jeremy Farrar, who's the Director of Wellcome, that many of you know well from the Grand Challenges, Chris Elias, who is the President of Global Development, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and here from Germany, Anna Holzscheiter, who is Professor of Political Science and International Relations at the Free University of Berlin. And that already indicates to you the scope of what we hope to discuss. We just heard from the minister who said, what does leadership mean? And leadership means so many different things. Leadership means the kind of things that you do, leading in science, innovation, taking us forward in what we are able to implement. But leadership, of course, also means structures, institutions, political support, and very frequently, it also means money. We are in a place, Berlin, many of you will know its history, its very checkered, difficult history, but many of you will know that some of the greatest leaders in health and medicine came from this country, actually came from an institution that's reasonably close to here, the Charité. I'll just mention a couple of names, Rudolf Virchow, who we often quote in public health. We, of course, have, now that we look at tuberculosis again, we have Koch, we have Behrendt, we have many traditions that sadly Germany lost. And this is one of the things that we will be discussing, that now again, after many years, Germany has again moved forward to be a leader in global health. And we would like to explore that together. What does it mean? What does it mean also for other institutions? We heard a lot about partnership. What does it mean particularly for Africa and the African continent? So our questions are in a way structured around that. And we hope it will give you a helpful background to the kind of research and innovation challenges that you will be discussing. So I'd like to ask Chris Elias first. Chris, what significance do Germany's investments towards global health have? Why is it important that this country be a leader in global health? What are also the expectations towards Germany in that respect?
So thank you, Ilona. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome everyone. You know, Germany has assumed a very important leadership role in global health and development, as you mentioned, building on a very long history of science and technology, and in bilateral assistance to many poor countries. And I think, you know, over the last several years, particularly I think over the last 4 or 5 years, Germany has actually stepped into an even stronger leadership role. For me, one of the turning points was early in 2015 when Germany hosted the Gavi replenishment, one of the most successful replenishments of one of the most successful global alliances, public-private partnerships. You know, through its contributions to Gavi, along with others, you know, Gavi has saved maybe 9 million lives over the last 15 years. You know, one of the main reasons that we've seen such a drop in under-5 child mortality has been the introduction of new vaccines, as well as improving coverage in some of the poorest countries to bring down vaccine-preventable diseases. Germany's also been an incredibly important donor to the Global Fund for AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. And again, we're seeing, as Bill Gates highlighted briefly in his presentation, tremendous progress in those 3 diseases as well. I think that it's really, you know, a kind of new level of maturation in the German leadership. There has been, my impression over the last few years is that while there have always been important scientific collaborations between individual investigators and individual here in Germany and partners around the world, you know, through the use of Germany's increased resources, now the second largest funder of overseas development assistance for global health and development, as well as voice. You know, the prioritization of global health within the government's coalition treaty, the use of the convening power through the G7 and the G20 have brought a new prominence to the global stage for Germany as an important development actor, again complementing a long history of bilateral programs. From the Gates Foundation perspective, we found in that richer environment lots of opportunities for collaboration. We have about $80 million of research and development investments here in Germany, some of it through the Grand Challenges, others through other partnerships around product development partnerships, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, et cetera. Increasingly, we find that the rich ecosystem of science, technology, engineering leadership here is an asset for us in partnering together to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And so it's a pleasure to be here and to be on the panel to help highlight some of that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I'll pass on to you, Jeremy. The Minister already mentioned some of the important innovation projects and hub initiatives that Germany is supporting, and of course Wellcome is also part to a number of these. How have you seen this commitment to innovation, to global health research, and the political commitment underlying it? How have you seen that evolve from the Wellcome perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Leona, and great pleasure to be here, and thank you and welcome to everybody. Building on what Chris was just talking about, and actually reflecting on, for myself, the last 5 years. I've been at Wellcome now for 5 years, and in that 5 years, the world has really changed. And I think it's really changed at a political level more than perhaps many of us were expecting. And I'll get the word out now, because then it never has to be mentioned again, Brexit. And of course, events that happened in other parts of the world as well, changed the political landscape. And it changed it in ways that I think are really concerning. So if you look at any of the great challenges, the grand challenges that we face today, it doesn't matter particularly what you choose, from climate change to drug resistance to inequality to migration. It doesn't really matter what you choose. The truth is that none of those can be answered by any organization. None of those can be answered by any country working in isolation. And multilateralism and the willingness to partner with others to address common challenges and global public good is something that I think is really part of where Germany is positioning itself at the moment and into the future. And you can see that through the pitch Germany made to join the Security Council, the United Nations, the incredibly strong support from Germany for the reforms, but also the funding of the United Nations, the World Health Organization. And at a time when some countries, and being British, I will call out Britain, is in danger, not yet there, but is in danger of looking in a more insular way. I think countries like Germany, with such a critical leadership role to play, making that continued case for the values that come from us working together, is perhaps one of the greatest strengths that Germany can bring to the global health agenda. Of course, it brings great science. It brings great innovation. It brings great small and medium-sized and large companies. It also brings, and Berlin, I think, is the exemplar of this, it brings a willingness to put that science and innovation in the context of the society in which it operates in. And the cultural hub that is developing here in Berlin and across the Länder and in other cities within Germany, I think is a remarkable coming together of those three things that really matter if you want to address the great challenges: science, innovation, and society. And I think Germany is articulating that at the moment better than any other country.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And we sort of speculate and discuss how much this commitment to global health is, of course, also linked to our Chancellor, Angela Merkel, who is a scientist, who's a physicist, and who basically, around the Gavi negotiations that Chris mentioned, basically fell in love with global health and has since then been a strong supporter, and many of you will be able to listen to her later today as she reinforces that political commitment. Chidi, what I would like to ask you is, how does this commitment to innovation reflect in partnerships in Africa? What kind of cooperation already exists? You have been coming regularly also to Germany, to the World Health Summit. You've met many of the German political actors and funders. What would you like to share with us about this engagement in health and development? And has it changed over the past decade? Do you notice something in Africa that these Germans are better leaders?
Okay, thank you very much, Ilona, and I'm very pleased to be able to join for the first time the Grand Challenges movement, in a way, at a time when I think is very relevant for the work that we are doing in WHO. And just referring to Germany's leadership and the effect and impact and impetus that it's having in Africa, I'll just echo what was said and said we greatly appreciate in WHO the strong support and advocacy for multilateralism that comes out of Germany, that was so strongly expressed by the Minister of Health at the opening of the World Health Summit, where he reiterated support not only for WHO, which we deeply appreciate, but for multilateralism. And this has been shown in some of the work that Germany has been doing in Africa, which helps to translate Germany's and partners' innovations into services for people in the African region as well as in other parts of the world. Germany is a strong proponent and practitioner of supporting integrated health systems delivery of innovations and services. And this builds very well, I think, on the support that it has on these global multilateral alliances like Gavi and the Global Fund, which address specific diseases. And I think if we talk about evolution over the years, we've learned through implementation of these programs that at the end of the day, to reach the last mile, to reach those who are most vulnerable, who are most marginalized, you really need to have strong, resilient health systems in these countries that are able to work in partnership with supporters, with civil societies, with communities, to ensure that the very last child in the poorest village, in the farthest place from the capital city, actually gets immunized. And so we have appreciated very much the strong support that Germany is proposing for universal health coverage, not only for vertical programs, but to find an appropriate interfacing with a strong, resilient health systems, with the health workers that are needed, with the delivery mechanisms, with the health infrastructure, data systems, etc. This is building very much on Germany's bilateral support to health system strengthening in countries. And in my work visiting many countries, I encounter experts from GIZ, German embassies, and other German organizations that are playing a strong role in supporting and advocating this at the country level, where implementation of all these innovations and new technologies actually will make a difference to people's lives. So I very much appreciate that strategic engagement, both in research and development, in innovation, and in working in a multilateral way to support that the countries, the poorest countries, are improving their healthcare systems so that they're able to bring this all together in services that are available to people all over the world. So Germany has been a strong advocate for this, and we are very encouraged by the fact that this is done not only at the practical, technical level, but also at the political level. And I've been very pleased that our Director General has been asked by Chancellor Angela Merkel and the leaders of Norway and Ghana to work with our partners to develop an action plan for the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goal 3, because that really anchors all of this together, the innovations, the new developments, and the realities on the ground and the capacity of countries to deliver to people.
Thank you very much, Chidi, and you will, of course, have the opportunity again later today to be introduced to this global SDG 3 action plan, which has brought together 11 organizations to move forward, and they have committed themselves. Again, the word that was mentioned both by Trevor and by the Minister frequently, the coming together, the coordination, the cooperation between the many actors. But what you said, Chidi, also in a way leads us a little bit into history again, the Bismarck system of health insurance, of social protection, something that's very much in the German DNA, something that has survived 2 world wars, that provided continuity in terms of social protection, and also to some extent drives Germany's understanding of the protection we need for health. When some of you speak about health security, maybe at first instance the link is more to a sort of military nature kind of thinking. If Germans say health security, they think of their social security and the kind of solidarity that emerges. And some of you might know that in the chairmanship of the Security Council at the UN, Germany has defined global health security as one of its 4 priorities as well. So Anna, you're a political scientist. You've sort of looked also at the long developments. What's different about German global health involvement now? What did it do the years before? Wasn't it there at all? Was it invisible? What was happening?
So thank you, Ilona, and I'm also very pleased to be here and on this panel. And I think you can indeed say that the German engagement in the field of global health and development cooperation has seen a great turnaround in approximately the last 10 years. It has a long tradition engaging in development cooperation and also emphasizing health issues in development cooperation. But it has only recently assumed this leadership role that we now all cherish so much. So it's also a latecomer to this field, which doesn't mean that it has, you've already mentioned it, it has a long-standing experience in bilateral cooperation in the health sector. I would also stress that Germany has always had a solid but also contentious partnership with civil society organizations in the country. Also those associated with churches, for example, they have done for decades a valuable development cooperation and also health programs. While on the other hand, I think it is still experiencing with collaboration with the private sector. It is cooperating with international foundations, but it still has to, engage in dialogue with the national foundations and also boost the sector and also academia. So there are more calls for intensification and also expansion of this field. And that's for that reason, and because I'm part of this area and also social science research on global health, I'm very happy to see the momentum that's gathering also in the country to make Berlin a global health hub, development organizations also seeking dialogue with scholars in the country and beyond. On Friday, I was attending a meeting between Oxford scholars and Berlin scholars that want to intensify their interdisciplinary cooperation in global health. So in a nutshell, Germany is now out on the floor as we are here in this spotlight, and there is also a lot of responsibility it wants to shoulder, or some people think it should shoulder, but at the same time, there are areas where we still need to see actions beyond increasing funding for multilateral institutions and other partnerships.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for making the point. You know, the more you sort of move forward, the more you are in the spotlight, the more responsibility you are expected to take on, the more expectations come, and of course, the more accountable you become because people watch you. And I'm very glad you mentioned the strong role of civil society in German health and the very long-standing commitment to strengthening health services and universal health coverage. Because we must understand that Germany stuck to this at a point in time when many other organizations and countries focused on disease-specific organizations and programs only. And so now with, as Chidi said, coming to the universal health coverage agenda, Germany can again in a new way reinforce and bring to the table those experiences of many decades of working at the country level to move it forward. But Anna, you also mentioned this magic word that we're starting to use here in Germany, the Global Health Hub. And the Global Health Hub that is here in Berlin, of course, connected to other initiatives and institutions throughout Germany, where we see the number of global health centers grow, where we see global health research grow. Jeremy, why have you decided to come here? You've decided to open an office here in Berlin. What is it that'll make a difference?
The weather, the food. It's not Britain. There is a real, I mean, it's grown over the last 10 years, as Anna said, and all of us here, I think, have really noticed and appreciated it over our last 5. But it does seem with the, and it seems to us, as an outsider, cross-party political. In my conversations as part of the International Advisory Group that you chair, we've had meetings across the political spectrum, and I've never doubted that commitment to Germany's role in global health isn't felt widely, if not completely, across the political spectrum. And it does seem as if it's one of those moments when, you know, a great country with great traditions and all of the science innovation and the political science that comes with it, that this is an opportunity for Germany and Berlin to take on this extra step. And you mentioned responsibility and accountability and leadership, and you almost framed it as a thing to be frightened of. It's not. It's a thing to embrace and enjoy and work in partnership with others to deliver. Responsibility and accountability shouldn't be intimidating, and they shouldn't stop people doing things. And I think the hub here, which will bring together all of the things we've talked about, critically, importantly, that issue of social science and political science that brings in what I talked about society and culture. That's the opportunity to forge a new way of thinking at a time when I think the world really needs to address some really, really big challenges.
Thank you, Jeremy. And of course, indirectly, you've alluded to what were also discussions when we did the analyses of Germany's role in global health for The Lancet, and many of the discussions we have, that there is a German ambivalence about leadership and exerting leadership. And it's very encouraging to hear from the outside that, you know, guys, get on with it and help us move forward together with others. And that's, of course, also why Germany created an international advisory board for its global health strategy. Some of you might know that Germany was one of the first countries to do a national global health strategy, bringing all sectors of government together. Now it's a process of bringing all sectors of society together to move into a new phase of such a global health strategy. And Chris, you're also a member of this international advisory group. What convinced you to spend your time advising Germany on this, and what have your experiences been in that group?
Well, the first part's easy because you asked me, so yeah, of course said yes. But, you know, it goes a little bit to why we're also opening an office here in Berlin. We don't have offices in many places. In addition to our US offices, we have 3 offices in Africa, an office in India and China. And this is our second office in Europe after London. And I think that the reason is really, much like Jeremy said, it's the opportunity for partnership and collaboration. And it goes to, and I've learned this through participation on the advisory board, there's a rich ecosystem in Germany. In some ways, it's a nascent ecosystem. The pieces have been growing in prominence, overcoming the reluctance to take on the mantle of leadership. But you have strong political commitment, which is led by the Chancellor, but is really, I think, palpable across the many ministries that touch the global health enterprise here in Germany. You have a diversity of actors from academia, research institutes, strong civil society, and industry. And you have increased resources, and you have increased partnership. Groups like the Gates Foundation welcome increasing first one by one, our investment in partnerships here, but now it almost feels like you have all the right ingredients for excellent stew, and now you just have to kind of heat it up a little bit. And that's a good time to be here, because innovation really happens where you bring all those pieces together. The diversity of actors, funding, increased political leadership, prominence, et cetera. And we're drawn by some of the things Jeremy mentioned in his initial statement, a secure sense of purpose around the multilateral institutions, Gavi, the Global Fund, the recent increase in voluntary contributions to the World Health Organization, the charge to Dr. Tedros to help lead the SDG 3 action plan. All of these make it a very ripe environment for the Gates Foundation and Wellcome as catalytic philanthropies that can come in and partner across the different areas and lend what we've learned. We're not that old of an institution either. I think to some of the things Anna said, there's a huge opportunity, largely untapped yet, for more creative public-private partnerships between the industry and academia, between the multilateral institutions and civil society. So it just felt like it was time for us to be part of that. So that's part of what I've been learning through the advisory board, but also a reason why we want to be part of it.
Thank you. And we are seeing what you indicated, that actually many of the actors in Germany, particularly also in research, are actually realizing, my gosh, we're part of the global health family. And we had this fantastic experience with our major hospital, which is also a big research center, the Charité, which woke up one day and said, my gosh, all these people are working all around the world on malaria, on heart disease, on cancer, in all kinds of fields, but we never talk to each other. And actually, we were delighted now, a couple of weeks ago, the Charité opened a global health center where all those partnerships that partly individual researchers, partly institutions, partly hospital partnerships, etc., are now being brought together to really create synergies to also work more at the country level with other countries. And that's where I'd like to come back to you, Chidi. In what way are you seeing some of these partnerships really work out on the ground? You already mentioned GIZ, etc., but also in terms of research cooperation. I'm also thrilled if I think of the head of CDC in Nigeria, who's very close links to Germany. So training people who go back to their countries. So what are the kind of things that you experience?
Yes, thank you. And just talking about the head of CDC in Nigeria, I bumped into him in the corridor yesterday. And it just so happens that the Botswana Ministry of Foreign Affairs is in his country, and I've suggested to them a twinning between his CDC and the Botswana Ministry of Health. So that's kind of multiplying that partnership. I mean, speaking about an example, global health security and Germany's growing role in that, we've seen during and following in the latter part of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, a coming together of different partners in a very rapid, innovative way to develop a vaccine for Ebola, which was tested out in Guinea. There were several candidate vaccines, and one of them was used in Guinea. So subsequently, a coalition, a partnership has been established between researchers, between the public sector, between the private sector, between academia and civil society to work together to develop candidate vaccines to address some of the epidemic-prone communicable diseases in Africa, a partnership called CEPI. And Germany is playing a strong supportive role in that multilateral platform and supporting the development and working together of candidate vaccines. We are expecting WHO has advised, WHO is involved in this both at the global and the regional level, and has proposed a number of vaccines, and we're expecting by the end of this year 20 candidate vaccines to be being worked on by this coalition of partners. So this is again showing Germany's contribution and engagement in a platform that will really bring together several capacities and have a direct role in countries, because we have a way of, with support from CEPI and through WHO, of fast-tracking some of the regulatory mechanisms that enable these vaccines to be tested out in countries. So a vaccine is being used currently in the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and we're looking at ways to do preventive vaccination of healthcare workers in some of the surrounding countries. So that's one possible example. And then secondly, again, coming after the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, WHO has been supported to reform our work on health emergencies. So our health emergency program has been reformed by our member states, with Germany playing a very strong role in advocating and in contributing to one of the most important factors in the success of a response to an outbreak, establishing a contingency fund within WHO, a revolving contingency fund, which enables us today, which is different from the past, to be able to, within 24 hours, have the resources to put on the ground in a country our experts working with others to investigate a possible alert of an outbreak. And Germany has been one of the strongest advocates for this fund to be continued, to be filled by the other member states. For example, we were able, in the current outbreak of Ebola in the DRC, to allocate $1 million within 24 hours, have our experts there, and able to start with the government and partners the investigation and the response, while other funding mechanisms for such events kick in. So I think that this is, it's a very practical, both contribution role, but also a very strong advocacy role in promoting among the other member states and partners to contribute to such a mechanism.
And I think I'd like to take up this issue of the contingency fund, because in a way it's a more invisible way of supporting global health. You know, we easily always go out and say, well, we have vaccinated so many children or whatever. But here is a fund that actually enables WHO, after the reform of its emergency program, to respond rapidly, as you described. And at the moment, some of you might know, Dr. Tedros, the Director General, has called an emergency committee for tomorrow to see whether the present Ebola outbreak constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. So we're exactly at that situation again, that we really need this contingency fund, we need those resources. And Germany not only has advocated for it politically, it remains the largest donor to this contingency fund. And we hope that other countries will also join at that level. So Anna, we've heard various elements of, you know, that sort of come together around this new German role. What lessons can one draw from that?
I'd say in the first place that maybe Germany is a very credible leadership, precisely because of its past history of being a rather invisible agent or invisible country contributing to this. But also, and you mentioned this in the beginning, Ilona, it's also credible because it kind of, it has this positive experience with a social protection system in the country based on universal health coverage, very extensive ones, and solidarity, and now takes this and also promotes it in other parts of the world. So I think that the legitimacy and credibility of Germany in this field also comes from this congruence between all for the lessons learned in the country and then taking them to other places. And I was intrigued when I read that, for example, the heavy German involvement in universal health coverage in India with this smart card rollout, in a way, is also now being brought back to some cities in Germany, like Greifswald, Mannheim, Offenbach, where actually the lessons learned in India, the positive lessons, are also inspiring changes within the country, which is, I think, very much in the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think what we're seeing now in Germany is, and also Ilona and myself and other people in the audience have been writing a piece in the Lancet, an expert group on Germany's role in global health, and we specifically called for increasing funding to multilateral institutions, and that was one of our recommendations. And we're seeing this by now. Our health minister has just announced 150 million euro will go into the general budget of the WHO. So I also think that this is leadership in terms of supporting multilateral institutions and trust, also showing trust in these institutions, trying to go through these institutions rather than working around them somehow.
Jeremy, if I can come back to you, you've had a lot of contact now with leading German researchers, research institutions, etc. What could be improved? In our analyses of the Lancet, we said there's not yet enough cooperation. There is possibly a need, to create better synergies. It's a big country with many, many research programs, many foundations, etc. What have you experienced? Is there any advice also you would like to give from your long-standing experience of working with research agencies in other countries? Some of us have had the dream, maybe we should have a Fogarty-type program or things of that nature.
Always cautious about advising what could be improved. I'm not sure that's specific to Germany, but I think every institution and indeed every country has often a fragmented approach to things. I think when you stand back and you ask what, as an organization, or indeed in this case a country, is actually doing across the whole space, and you appreciate the breadth and the depth of what is going on, and particularly in academia, an appreciation that actually everybody gains if somebody gains, rather than if I win, you lose. And I think if we could, I'm looking at Stefan here in the audience, if you take TB as an example, I mean, Germany is one of the leading countries in terms of tuberculosis research globally, and obviously a very proud history. If you put that all together, from academia, industry, innovation, small, medium-sized companies, it would be an incredible powerhouse of what happens. If you look at what we just heard about from Anna on the social contract and universal health coverage and insurance schemes that goes back, if you put all of that together, that's an incredible story. To an outsider, it still seems a little bit fragmented. And is there an opportunity to bring that more coordinated without saying what should and should not be done? But that would be one aspect, I think, that I've picked up. And not being frightened to be really good at something. It's not about arrogance. It's not about saying that leadership is about shouting about yourself. But also, it's important because that stimulates young people to come into a field, and I think that could be something that more could be done. And finally, I think it is about what Germany will bring to global health, but it's also, and I think politically this is crucial, what global health can bring to Germany. And we had the example here of it's not a one-way street anymore. The world is changing, and with all of the discussions here politically at the moment, it's really important that people appreciate that by giving, you gain.
Thank you. That leads us very nicely into our final round of asking each of you to look ahead a little bit in terms of the challenges, in terms of the expectations, and where you think Germany can continue, maybe even strengthen playing its role, particularly, I would like to add, in partnership with others. And that, of course, means partnership with other countries, the multilateralism, which is very strong, the partnership with the Global South. The German plan is called, Marshall Plan with Africa, and trying to move that forward. a partnership of research institutions around the world. So could I ask each of you to pick one area where you think, this has a future, on this we should work together jointly? Chris?
Yeah, maybe I'll anchor it in the Grand Challenges meeting, because I think the challenge we all face is how to harness the incredible pace of new science and technology. Some of the things you heard Bill and Trevor talk about in their introductions. How do we harness that for some of the poorest people in the world? And there's a bit of a contradiction. Innovation is best when it's left to find its way. You can't overly architect it. And yet you have to and the Grand Challenge is such a great example of this. Look at, the people I've met in the last 2 days, the ideas that are at this conference and the related conferences this week are incredible. And you can't, structure that too much, or it won't be as innovative as it is. But then how do you harness that? And there's no one partnership by which you bring cutting edge science to the poorest people. There are many different partnership models. I think, it's been about 10 years since Germany started investing in some of the product development partnerships. More recently, in response to the Ebola outbreak, as Shidi was saying, some of the work with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. How do we, given there's such a rich environment of science, technology, engineering, now political commitment, now additional resources, and partnerships with groups outside of Germany, how do we define easier ways to more rapidly bring cutting-edge science, which has to be dependent on decentralized innovation, into the somewhat overly rigid multilateral institutions through which we get innovation to poor countries, and through the weak health systems by which poor countries get those benefits to their citizens. That's the challenge. There's no one answer to that. But I think this week is going to be a good example, and I like Trevor's example of what, providing an incentive for people to actually, find some specific ways to do that. But I think that's the opportunity we have this week, is to think about that big challenge of harnessing cutting-edge science and getting it to the poorest people in the world.
Thank you, Chris. We're running out of time, so I can only give each of you about a minute to say one challenge, one thing that'll take us forward. Anna.
Okay, I'll just pick up on what Jeremy and Chris have just said, in terms of maybe also a field of tension between innovation and also the, let's say, a fragmented landscape of many new ideas and a forward-looking, experimenting things happening in science and technology on the one hand, and then when the translation into politics and policies happens, then of course there's also calls for efficiency and effectiveness through maximum coherence and harmonization. And that's basically also agreeing on what is important, what is the case, what needs to observe and measures, and also obviously the establishment of routines and common understandings of issues. And I think in that sense, I also, and because I study international organizations a lot, and I believe in them too, multilateral institutions, I think a great challenge will be to bring everything that's maybe also only in this room into these institutions, and maybe Germany with its trust in these institutions is also a very good leader in that sense, that it's also working towards, for example, health system strengthening, in that way also integrating smaller initiatives into a larger framework, and maybe that's also the road forward.
Thank you. Chidi, 1 minute?
Yes. I think just thinking about the wealth of ideas, innovation, products, possibilities that are being generated out of movements like this, the reality is that at the end of the day, they will have to be delivered through the national health systems. They can go a certain way with an ungovernmental organization, but if you really want to reach that last person, it has to be through those systems. So one thing that Germany and movements like this can do is to stimulate and inspire some sort of innovation in implementation as well, implementation science, how to take this forward, how to benefit from all of this richness and be concerned and try and take risks to see that it reaches people everywhere. So if you can have a link between this and a more research-focused, innovative way of developing the systems for health, I think this could be a good contribution by Germany, which has experience and capacity in both.
Thank you. Jeremy.
So it seems so odd when we're talking about establishing Germany and Berlin as a hub, but thinking medium term, the shift in the center of gravity. We have the African Academy of Sciences here, we have India DBT Alliance, shifting where the agenda is set, where the peer review is done, where the decisions are made, out of Berlin, London, Geneva, Seattle, Washington, and shifting it to where the issues are. And that shift in the center of gravity, of which there are those two and other great examples, would be my push.
Thank you very much. It shows us clearly where the future is. I have a red dot here, so I've nearly finished on time. You know, being German, living in Switzerland, you have to learn to be punctual. I just want to highlight one thing, the way that innovation has sort of been used in this panel. That, of course, there's the research innovation and the kind of innovation that all of you drive towards. But I think we've also heard a very strong plea for innovation in implementation, innovation in systems, in how we do things, and how we can carry that forward. Innovation in the political world, in the policy world, what we need there, particularly new partners coming together and working together. And maybe last not least, the social innovation we need as our societies are changing, and how we need to be very aware of the challenges that we have, but also the social resources that we have available. If we think of the World Bank's push for capital, for human capital, to link that also to social capital that make our societies function and that help us really work together in a new phase of multilateralism and global health. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel.